Welcome, and thank you for joining us. Over the next several hours, we're going to take a journey together, not to one cemetery, but to many. From the quiet lawns of Los Angeles to a hillside in Seattle, from the rolling fields of Virginia to a cobblestoned corner of Paris, we'll visit the graves of 40 famous people who all share one thing in common. They died under circumstances that remain, to this day, mysterious, disputed, or never fully explained. Some of these names you'll know instantly. Others may surprise you. All of them left the world with questions that have never been answered to everyone's satisfaction. So settle in, and let's begin where so many of these stories seem to begin. In Los Angeles, our first stop is a tiny cemetery tucked behind office buildings and a parking garage in the Westwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park is barely 2 acres, and you could walk past the entrance on Glendale Avenue without ever knowing it was there. But step through that narrow driveway, and you'll find yourself surrounded by some of the most famous names in entertainment. And the most famous of all rests in a wall of crypts in what the cemetery calls the Corridor of Memories. Marilyn Monroe was 36 years old when she was found dead in her Brentwood home on the morning of August 5, 1962. She was lying face down on her bed, a telephone receiver still in her hand, empty bottles of prescription sedatives on the nightstand. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled her death a probable overdose of barbiturates, but he used a curious word: probable. Not definitive, not certain. Probable. That single word has fueled more than 60 years of questions. Monroe had been in contact with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert in the months before her death, and the nature of those relationships has been debated ever since. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, changed her account of the night's events multiple times over the years. The lock on Monroe's bedroom door had been recently replaced. Key phone records from that evening vanished. The original police investigation was widely criticized as superficial, and the case was briefly reopened in 1982, though no new conclusions were reached. What is not in dispute is her talent and her hold on the American imagination. Born Norma Jean Mortensen, she spent her childhood bouncing between foster homes before reinventing herself as the most famous movie star on Earth. Gentlemen prefer blondes, some like it hot, the 7-year itch. She could be hilarious and heartbreaking, sometimes in the same scene. She was married 3 times, to a factory worker at 16, to Joe DiMaggio at 27, and to Arthur Miller at 30. None of the marriages lasted, but DiMaggio's devotion outlived them all. It was DiMaggio who handled her funeral arrangements, choosing this quiet, out-of-the-way cemetery because it was also the resting place of Monroe's childhood guardian. He kept the service small and private, deliberately excluding the Hollywood establishment he blamed for her troubles. And for 20 years after her death, he had red roses delivered to her crypt 3 times a week. Today, Crypt 24. In the Corridor of Memories is one of the most visited graves in the world. Fans leave lipstick kisses on the marker and tuck flowers into the crypt's edge. Playboy founder Hugh Hefner later purchased the crypt immediately beside hers. The small cemetery that DiMaggio chose precisely because it was not a celebrity destination has, ironically, become one of the most star-studded burial grounds in Los Angeles. From that quiet corner of Westwood, let's travel clear across the country, and back in time, to Montgomery, Alabama, where country music's greatest voice fell silent on New Year's Day, 1953. Hank Williams was 29 years old. He was being driven to a concert in Canton, Ohio by a college student named Charles Carr. They'd left Montgomery the previous afternoon, but an ice storm had forced a change of plans, and Williams spent his last conscious hours in the back seat of a powder blue Cadillac convertible, drifting in and out of sleep. At a gas station in Oak Hill, West Virginia, Carr realized Williams wasn't sleeping anymore. He was dead. The autopsy attributed his death to heart failure, specifically insufficiency of the right ventricle. But Williams was 29, and the circumstances leading up to that night have never been fully sorted out. At a hotel stop in Knoxville the evening before, a doctor had given Williams injections of vitamin B12 that were later found to contain morphine. Williams had also been drinking and taking chloral hydrate, a powerful sedative. He'd been kicked in a bar fight in Montgomery a few days earlier. He suffered from spina bifida occulta, a spinal condition that had caused him chronic pain for years and driven him deeper into alcohol and pills. His body was a wreck long before that final car ride. Was it an accidental overdose compounded by a weakened heart? A medical misadventure from that morphine injection? The simple giving out of a body that had been punished far beyond its years? No one has ever pinpointed a single cause with certainty, and the debate continues among historians and fans. What Williams accomplished in his short life is staggering. Your cheatin' heart, I'm so lonesome I could cry, hey, good lookin', cold, cold heart, lovesick blues, jambalaya. The list of essential American songs that came from this one man seems impossible for a career that lasted barely 6 years in the spotlight. He joined the Grand Ole Opry in 1949 and was fired from it by 1952, his drinking having become unmanageable. His last released single during his lifetime was titled, with grim irony, I'll Never Get Out of This World Alive. His funeral, held at the Montgomery City Auditorium, drew an estimated 20,000 mourners, the largest funeral Montgomery had ever seen. He was buried at the Oakwood Cemetery Annex, where fans pulled up so many blades of grass as souvenirs that the grounds eventually had to be covered in artificial turf. His grave and that of his ex-wife Audrey sit beneath tall marble monuments, and ceremonies are still held there twice a year, on his birthday in September and on the anniversary of his death every New Year's Day. From the heartland of country music, we turn now to the most famous burial site in America, and the most consequential, mysterious death of the 20th century. Arlington National Cemetery spreads across more than 600 acres of rolling Virginia hillside, directly across the Potomac from Washington, D.C. Among its rows of simple white headstones, one grave draws more visitors than any other. An eternal flame, burning continuously since 1963, marks the resting place of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy was assassinated while riding in a motorcade through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. He was 46 years old, the youngest elected president and, at that point, the youngest to die in office. Governor John Connally, riding in the same car, was seriously wounded. Within 2 hours, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested and charged with the murder. 2 days later, Oswald himself was shot dead on live television by nightclub owner Jack Ruby, ensuring that the accused assassin would never stand trial and never give his full account. The Warren Commission, established by President Lyndon Johnson, concluded in 1964 that Oswald had acted alone. But that conclusion was questioned almost immediately, and a 1979 congressional investigation reached a different finding: that Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, though it could not identify the other conspirators. The debate has never ended. Theories involving the CIA, the Mafia, Cuban exiles, the Soviet Union, and various combinations thereof have filled thousands of books and documentaries. Classified documents have been released in batches over the decades, each wave generating new arguments. Kennedy's burial at Arlington was planned by his widow, Jacqueline, who requested the eternal flame, inspired by a similar memorial at the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. The grave is set on a hillside below Arlington House with a sweeping view of the Capitol. Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis was buried beside him after her death in 1994, along with 2 of their children who died in infancy. Kennedy's brother, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, rests nearby, but we'll come to his story a bit later. From the green hills of Virginia, let's return to Los Angeles, this time to the sprawling grounds of Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, one of the most famous cemeteries in the world. Forest Lawn occupies more than 300 acres and is the final resting place of an extraordinary number of Hollywood legends. Among them, in a private section called the Garden of Honor, rests a woman who broke barriers in ways that Hollywood was not ready to acknowledge. Dorothy Dandridge was the first African-American woman to be nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress, earning that nomination for her starring role in the 1954 film Carmen Jones. She was stunningly talented, a singer, dancer, and actress who could command a screen with an ease that few of her contemporaries could match. She performed at venues across the country, from the Cotton Club to the Waldorf Astoria, and appeared in films including Island in the Sun and Porgy and Bess. But the racial politics of 1950s Hollywood meant that the roles she deserved never materialized. After Carmen Jones, no studio offered her a leading role of comparable stature. Her career stalled, her finances crumbled, and her personal life was marked by a series of painful relationships and a devastating legal battle over the care of her brain-damaged daughter. On September 8, 1965, Dandridge was found dead in her small Hollywood apartment. She was 42. The coroner determined that she had died of an overdose of an antidepressant medication called imipramine, but the exact circumstances have been debated ever since. Her manager, Earl Mills, who discovered her body, insisted for years that her death was not intentional, suggesting instead that she may have suffered an adverse reaction to the medication or accidentally taken too much. Others have pointed to signs that she may have taken her own life. A note was found, but its contents have been described differently by different sources over the years, and its meaning remains ambiguous. Whatever the truth, Dorothy Dandridge's story is one of extraordinary talent thwarted by the prejudices of her time, and her death at 42 robbed American cinema of a performer who should have had decades of great work ahead of her. Just across the grounds from Dandridge, also within Forest Lawn, Glendale, lies another figure whose death changed the course of American music. Sam Cooke had one of the most beautiful voices in the history of popular music. If you've ever heard You Send Me, or A Change Is Gonna Come, or Cupid, or Twistin' the Night Away, you know that voice, warm, effortless, intimate, the kind of voice that makes you feel like he's singing directly to you. He was a pioneer of soul music, one of the first black artists to take control of the business side of his career, founding his own record label and publishing company at a time when that was virtually unheard of. He was also deeply involved in the civil rights movement, working alongside figures like Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X, and Jim Brown. On December 11, 1964, Sam Cooke was shot and killed at the Hacienda Motel in south-central Los Angeles. He was 33 years old. The motel's manager, Bertha Franklin, claimed she shot Cooke in self-defense after he burst into her office in a rage, demanding to know the whereabouts of a young woman who had accompanied him to the motel earlier that evening. That woman, Elisa Boyer, told police that Cooke had brought her to the motel against her will and that she had fled with his clothes while he was in the bathroom, leading to his angry confrontation with Franklin. An inquest jury deliberated for just 15 minutes before ruling Cooke's death a justifiable homicide. His family never accepted that verdict. The story had too many holes. Why was one of the biggest stars in America at a cheap motel in the first place? Why were his injuries so extensive if it was a simple self-defense shooting? Boyer's account shifted in the retelling, and her own background raised questions about whether the evening's events unfolded the way she described. Some have speculated that Cooke's manager, Alan Klein, who gained control of Cooke's music catalog after his death, may have had a motive. No definitive answers have ever emerged. 200,000 mourners lined the streets of Chicago to view his body. Ray Charles sang at his Los Angeles funeral. And A Change Is Gonna Come, released posthumously, became one of the defining anthems of the civil rights era, a song whose hopefulness now carries an added weight of sorrow. Leaving Forest Lawn. Glendale lets drive a few miles east to the foothill community of Altadena, where a small mausoleum at Mountain View Cemetery holds the ashes of a man who was, for millions of children in the 1950s, the most powerful person on Earth. George Reeves played Superman. Not just any Superman, the first one most Americans ever saw on a screen, in the television series Adventures of Superman, which ran from 1952 to 1958. For 104 episodes, Reeves put on the cape and tights and convinced a generation of kids that a man could fly. He was so identified with the role that getting cast in anything else became nearly impossible, a frustration that weighed on him heavily. On June 16, 1959, Reeves was found dead in the upstairs bedroom of his Benedict Canyon home. He'd been shot once in the head, A Luger pistol was on the floor near his body. His fiancée, Lenore Lemon, and 3 house guests were downstairs at the time. The death was ruled a self-inflicted gunshot wound, but questions arose almost immediately. No one called police for 45 minutes after the shot was heard. Investigators never tested Reeves's hands for gunpowder residue. There were unexplained bruises on his body. 2 additional bullet holes were found in the bedroom floor, which is unusual if only 1 shot was fired. The shell casing was found beneath his body, which some firearms experts have said is inconsistent with the weapon being fired by the person lying on the bed. Reeves's mother refused to believe her son had killed himself and hired a prominent Hollywood attorney to investigate. The trail led in multiple directions. Reeves had recently ended an affair with Toni Mannix, whose husband Eddie was a powerful vice president at MGM with alleged connections to organized crime. Reeves had also been involved in disputes with Lemon. Some investigators have theorized that the shooting was carried out on behalf of the scorned Toni Mannix. Others believe Lemon may have been involved. Still others accept the official ruling. The mystery was explored in the 2006 film Hollywoodland, with Ben Affleck playing Reeves. But more than 60 years later, the case remains officially closed as a death by one's own hand, a conclusion that satisfies almost no one who has looked closely at the evidence. His mother had his ashes placed in a niche at Mountain View Cemetery in Altadena. The plaque she chose reads simply, "My beloved son, Superman." Let's head back across Los Angeles to the Westwood Cemetery where we started, because just a short walk from Marilyn Monroe's crypt in the open lawn area lies a flat bronze marker for an actress whose death in the waters off Catalina Island remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. Natalie Wood was a star from childhood. She was the little girl who didn't believe in Santa Claus in Miracle on 34th Street. She was just 8 years old. By her teens, she was earning Academy Award nominations, first for Rebel Without a Cause, alongside James Dean, and later for Splendor in the Grass and Love with the Proper Stranger. She lit up West Side Story as Maria. She was nominated for 3 Oscars before the age of 25. On November 29, 1981, Wood drowned during a weekend boating trip near Catalina Island. She was 43. She'd been aboard a yacht called the Splendor with her husband, actor Robert Wagner, her Brainstorm co-star Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. Sometime during the night, Wood ended up in the water. Her body was found the next morning, floating face down, wearing a flannel nightgown, a down jacket, and socks. The original coroner's report listed her death as an accidental drowning. But in 2012, the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner changed the cause of death to drowning and other undetermined factors, citing bruises on her body and arms that could not be explained. The case was officially reopened. Wagner was named a person of interest in 2018. Davern, the captain, changed his story over the years, eventually saying that Wagner and Wood had argued that night, and that Wagner had delayed calling for help. Wagner has denied any involvement. Wood's death is made even more poignant by a fact well known to her friends and family. She had a lifelong, paralyzing fear of dark water. Her sister has said Natalie would never have gone near the dinghy alone at night. It's a detail that sits at the center of every theory about what happened, and it's a detail that has never been reconciled with the official record. Her grave in Westwood bears a flat bronze marker with an Orthodox cross and 2 phrases, daughter, sister, wife, mother, and friend, and near the bottom, more than love. We've visited graves in California, Alabama, and Virginia so far. Now let's take a journey to a city not often associated with celebrity grave sites, Baltimore, Maryland, where one of America's greatest writers rests beneath a monument that, appropriately enough, has its own air of mystery. Edgar Allan Poe is buried at Westminster Hall, a former Presbyterian church in downtown Baltimore that is now a landmark and event venue. His original burial in 1849 was in an unmarked grave in the churchyard, but in 1875 his remains were moved to a prominent spot near the front of the grounds, marked by a marble monument. Poe died on October 7, 1849, at the age of 40. 4 days earlier, he had been found delirious and incoherent on the streets of Baltimore, wearing clothes that were not his own. He was taken to Washington College Hospital, where he drifted in and out of consciousness, reportedly calling out the name Reynolds, a reference no one has ever definitively explained. He never recovered enough to describe what had happened to him. The cause of his death has been debated for more than 170 years. At various times, researchers have proposed rabies, alcohol poisoning, carbon monoxide poisoning, heavy metal poisoning, a brain tumor, meningitis, cholera, and a practice called cooping, a form of voter fraud in which victims were drugged, disguised in different clothing, and forced to vote multiple times at different polling places. Baltimore was holding an election on the day Poe was found. The clothing he wore was not his own. The theory fits disturbingly well with the known facts, but like all the other theories, it remains unproven. There's one more curious detail about Poe's gravesite. For decades, from 1949 to 2009, a mysterious figure known as the Poe Toaster visited his grave every year on his birthday, January 19th, in the early morning hours, leaving 3 red roses and a half bottle of cognac. The visitor's identity was never confirmed, though the tradition appeared to pass from one person to another over the years. The visit stopped in 2009, adding one final mystery to the story of a man who practically invented the genre. From the literary shadows of Baltimore, let's cross the Atlantic to the English countryside, where in the town of Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, a modest grave holds one of the founding members of one of the most important rock bands in history. Brian Jones was a co-founder of the Rolling Stones. He didn't just join the band, he created it. In 1962, it was Jones who placed the advertisement in Jazz News looking for musicians, Jones who named the group after a Muddy Waters song, and Jones who served as its original leader. He was a multi-instrumentalist of extraordinary range, playing guitar, harmonica, sitar, marimba, dulcimer, and virtually anything else he picked up. His musical curiosity helped shape the Stones' early sound and push the band toward experimentation. But by the late 60s, drugs and internal tensions had taken a toll. Jones's contributions to the band diminished, and in June of 1969, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards told him he was out. Less than a month later, on July 3rd, Jones was found motionless at the bottom of his swimming pool at Cochford Farm, his home in Sussex. He was 27 years old. The coroner's verdict was death by misadventure, essentially accidental drowning while intoxicated. His liver was severely enlarged, consistent with heavy drug and alcohol use. But almost immediately, questions arose. The builder who had been doing renovation work at the farm, Frank Thorogood, was at the pool that night, along with Jones's girlfriend, Anna Wolin. Wolin has maintained for decades that Jones was murdered, alleging that Thorogood drowned him during a confrontation. A nurse who was called to the scene claimed that Jones's body showed signs of being held underwater. In 1993, a journalist published a claim that Thorogood had confessed to the killing on his own deathbed in 1993. Thorogood's family denied it. The police have revisited the case several times without changing the official finding. Jones was buried in Cheltenham Cemetery in the town where he grew up. His grave has become a pilgrimage site for Stones fans from around the world. Just weeks after his death, the Stones played a massive free concert in London's Hyde Park, dedicated to his memory, with Jagger reading from Shelley's poem Adonais before releasing hundreds of butterflies. Back across the Atlantic now, and back in time to the glamorous and dangerous Hollywood of the early 1930s, where a beautiful blonde actress was found dead in circumstances that have never been satisfactorily explained. Thelma Todd was one of the busiest actresses in early Hollywood. She appeared in more than 120 films between 1926 and 1935, working with the Marx Brothers in Horse Feathers and Monkey Business with Laurel and Hardy, and with Buster Keaton in Charlie Chase. She was funny, glamorous, and sharp. And she also ran a popular restaurant on the Pacific Coast Highway called Thelma Todd's Sidewalk Cafe. On the morning of December 16, 1935, Todd was found dead behind the wheel of her Lincoln Phaeton convertible, inside the garage of her business partner and former lover, Roland West. She was 29. The official cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning. but the circumstances made no sense. Todd had been at a party the night before at the Trocadero nightclub and had been dropped off at home by her chauffeur well after midnight. Her apartment was above the cafe, but the garage where she was found was at the top of a steep outdoor staircase. 271 steps. She was wearing evening clothes and delicate satin shoes. There was no soot on her shoes and no evidence she had climbed those steps. Her blood alcohol level was high enough to make climbing that staircase in heels extremely unlikely. She had a broken nose that was never explained. The grand jury investigated but reached no conclusion. Theories abound. West reportedly confessed on his deathbed decades later that he had accidentally locked Todd in the garage. Others have pointed to mobster Lucky Luciano, who had been pressuring Todd to allow illegal gambling in the upstairs rooms of her cafe, a demand she had refused. Her ex-husband was also considered a suspect at one point. The case was never resolved, and Todd remains one of early Hollywood's most tragic and puzzling figures. She was laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale. Not far from Thelma Todd's final resting place, back at our starting point of Westwood Memorial Park, lies the grave of a man whose murder has become one of the most perplexing unsolved cases in Hollywood history. Bob Crane was America's Colonel Hogan. For 6 seasons, from 1965 to 1971, he starred as the wisecracking, scheme-hatching American POW in Hogan's Heroes, one of the most popular sitcoms of its era. Before television, Crane had been a hugely successful radio host in Los Angeles, broadcasting the morning show on KNX, the CBS flagship station on the West Coast. He was charming, quick-witted, and beloved by his audience. After Hogan's Heroes ended, Crane's career declined. He spent most of the 1970s touring the dinner theater circuit, starring in a comedy called Beginner's Luck. On June 29, 1978, Crane was found bludgeoned to death in his apartment in Scottsdale, Arizona, where he'd been performing the play. He was 49 years old. An electrical cord had been wrapped around his neck after death. There was no forced entry, and nothing of value was missing. The investigation quickly focused on John Henry Carpenter, a video equipment salesman who had become Crane's close friend and companion in a secret double life involving the videotaping of sexual encounters with women. Crane and Carpenter had been inseparable for years, but Crane had recently told Carpenter he wanted to distance himself from the friendship. Carpenter was in Scottsdale visiting Crane at the time of the murder and left town early the next morning. A photograph taken by police appeared to show a small speck of biological material in Carpenter's rental car, but the evidence was so poorly preserved that it was useless at trial. Carpenter was finally charged in 1992, 14 years after the murder, but a jury acquitted him in 1994. He maintained his innocence until his own death in 1998. Today, Crane and his second wife, Sigrid Valdis, who played Hilda on Hogan's Heroes and who married him on the show's set in 1970, share a grave in Westwood Memorial Park. Crane's murder remains officially unsolved. Speaking of unsolved political crimes, let's return to Arlington National Cemetery, where another Kennedy lies in repose, and where another assassination changed the trajectory of American history. Robert Francis Kennedy was 42 years old on June 5, 1968, when he won the California Democratic presidential primary. He had entered the race just 3 months earlier, galvanized by the horror of Vietnam and the poverty he had witnessed firsthand on trips to Appalachia and the Mississippi Delta. In those 81 days of campaigning, he had become the most electrifying political figure in America, drawing enormous ecstatic crowds that mobbed his motorcades and pulled at his clothes. He seemed to offer a bridge between Black America and white working-class America at a moment when the country was tearing itself apart. Minutes after delivering his victory speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, Kennedy was shot multiple times while walking through the hotel's kitchen pantry. He died the following day at Good Samaritan Hospital. A 24-year-old Jordanian named Sirhan Sirhan was apprehended at the scene, a small-caliber revolver in his hand, and convicted of the murder the following year. But the conviction didn't end the questions. Forensic analysis has long suggested that the fatal shot came from behind Kennedy and at close range. closer than Sirhan appeared to have been based on eyewitness accounts. The autopsy, performed by Dr. Thomas Noguchi, indicated the killing shot was fired from no more than 1 inch behind Kennedy's right ear. Yet most witnesses placed Sirhan in front of Kennedy, several feet away. Some investigators have argued that more bullets were fired in the pantry than Sirhan's 8-shot revolver could hold, suggesting a second gunman. In 2021, Kennedy's son, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., publicly stated his belief that Sirhan did not act alone and called for a new investigation. Sirhan's lawyers have pursued the second gunman theory for decades, and a security guard who was walking directly behind Kennedy that night has been named by some researchers as a person of interest, though he was never charged. Robert Kennedy is buried at Arlington, near his brother John, on a gentle slope facing the Lincoln Memorial. His grave is marked by a simple white cross. The distance between the two brothers' graves is short, but the 5 years between their deaths encompassed some of the most turbulent in American history. It is worth noting that Bobby Kennedy's funeral train, which carried his body from New York to Washington, passed through towns and cities where thousands of mourners lined the tracks in the summer heat, many of them weeping openly. It remains one of the most extraordinary displays of public grief in American history. From the solemnity of Arlington, let's shift to a different kind of mystery, one that played out in the world of rock and roll, involving a young musician whose hit song became an eerie footnote to his own death. Bobby Fuller was 23 years old and riding high. His band, the Bobby Fuller 4, had scored a top 10 hit with I Fought the Law, a driving, infectious rocker originally written by Sonny Curtis of the Crickets, Buddy Holly's old band, but made famous by Fuller's version. The song peaked at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1966, and the Bobby Fuller 4 were being talked about as the next big thing in American rock. Fuller was a genuinely talented musician who wrote, produced, and arranged most of his band's material. He had built his own recording studio back home in El Paso, Texas, before moving to Los Angeles to chase a bigger audience. The future looked wide open. On July 18, 1966, barely 4 months after I Fought the Law hit the charts, Fuller was found dead in his mother's car, parked outside his Hollywood apartment. His body was covered in gasoline, and there was evidence of bruising on his face and chest. The initial ruling was that he had died by inhaling gasoline fumes, but the question of whether his death was an accident, a result of his own actions, or foul play was never resolved. The coroner's report was vague and contradictory. At one point, the cause of death was listed as asphyxiation, then changed to accident, then briefly to a possible act of his own volition, and finally left ambiguous. Friends and bandmates were adamant that Fuller, who was upbeat and excited about his career, had no reason to harm himself. Some have theorized a connection to organized crime figures involved in the Los Angeles music scene at the time, but nothing was ever proven, and the Los Angeles Police Department closed the case without identifying a suspect. Bobby Fuller was buried at Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills. His song's title, I Fought the Law, became a bitter irony. The law, in this case, never fought hard enough to determine what happened to him. Speaking of cases the law never solved, our next stop is one of the most notorious cold cases in American criminal history. It involves a young woman whose real life was far less dramatic than the gruesome story she became known for. Elizabeth Short was a 22-year-old from Medford, Massachusetts, who had come to Los Angeles hoping to break into the movies. She had bounced around Southern California for a few years, working as a waitress, living with various acquaintances, and going on dates with soldiers and civilians alike. She was, by all accounts, a pretty and pleasant young woman who had not yet found her footing, one of thousands of aspiring starlets in post-war Los Angeles whose dreams were bigger than their prospects. On January 15, 1947, her body was discovered in a vacant lot in the Limert Park neighborhood. The condition of the body was so shocking that it made national headlines and earned the case a tabloid nickname, the Black Dahlia. The nickname may have been inspired by the 1946 film The Blue Dahlia, starring Alan Ladd, combined with Short's fondness for black clothing. Short had been killed elsewhere and her body deliberately placed in the lot. The scene was horrifying, and despite an enormous investigation, one of the largest in Los Angeles Police Department history at that time, no suspect was ever identified, charged, or convicted. Over the years, more than 60 people have confessed to the crime, all of them falsely. Dozens of suspects have been proposed in books and documentaries, including a physician, a nightclub owner, and at least one suspect whose own son accused him decades later. The case remains officially open with the LAPD nearly 80 years after it occurred. Elizabeth Short is buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, California, the same Mountain View where we visited the remains of George Reeves, though the two sections are far apart. She was laid to rest far from the city that made her name famous in the worst possible way. She was an ordinary young woman whose death became an extraordinary mystery, and the gap between who she actually was and the lurid legend that grew around her name is one of the saddest aspects of the story. From the dark streets of 1940s Los Angeles, let's travel up the Pacific coast to Seattle, Washington, and one of the most visited grave sites in the world. Bruce Lee lies at rest in Lakeview Cemetery on Capitol Hill, one of Seattle's oldest burial grounds. The cemetery sits on a hilltop with sweeping views of Lake Washington, a setting of remarkable peace for a man whose life was defined by explosive energy. Lee was born in San Francisco in 1940, raised in Hong Kong, and returned to the United States as a teenager, settling in Seattle, where he finished high school and attended the University of Washington. He opened his first martial arts school here. He married a Seattle woman, Linda Emery. Seattle was, in a very real sense, his American hometown. By the early 1970s, Lee had become the biggest action star in the world. The Big Boss and Fist of Fury shattered box office records in Asia. Enter the Dragon, the film that would introduce him to a massive global audience, was in post-production and set for release in the summer of 1973. He never saw it. On July 20th, 1973, Lee was in Hong Kong visiting actress Betty Ting Pei to discuss a film project. He complained of a headache. She gave him a prescription painkiller called Equagesic. Lee lay down to rest and never woke up. He was 32. The official cause of death was cerebral edema, swelling of the brain, attributed to a reaction to the painkiller. But Lee had suffered a similar episode of brain swelling 2 months earlier, which had been attributed to cannabis edema at the time. He had no history of allergic reactions. Theories about his death have ranged from the plausible, an undiagnosed medical condition, an unusual drug sensitivity, to the fanciful, including claims of a family curse. A 2022 study published in the Clinical Kidney Journal proposed that Lee may have died from hyponatremia, a condition caused by excessive water intake overwhelming the kidney's ability to excrete it, noting that Lee was known to consume large quantities of fluid as part of his fitness regimen. Whatever killed Bruce Lee, it happened fast, it happened young, and it happened on the eve of what should have been the greatest triumph of his career. His son Brandon lies beside him at Lakeview Cemetery, his own life cut short at 28 by a bizarre on-set accident during the filming of The Crow in 1993, when a prop gun loaded with a dummy round discharged a bullet that had become lodged in the barrel. Father and son, side by side on a Seattle hilltop, both taken far too soon under circumstances that defied expectation. Let's head back to the East Coast now, to another burial ground we visited earlier, Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York. This cemetery, just north of New York City, is the final resting place of several notable figures, including 2 people on our tour who died in very different ways but share a connection to the same legendary film. The first is a woman whose death was one of the great untold stories of its era. Dorothy Kilgallen was one of the most famous journalists in America. She was a syndicated newspaper columnist, a regular panelist on the hit television game show What's My Line, appearing on the program for 16 years, and a dogged investigative reporter who was not afraid to take on powerful people. In the early 1960s, she became consumed by the assassination of President Kennedy and the subsequent murder of Lee Harvey Oswald by Jack Ruby. Kilgallen was the only journalist to obtain a private interview with Ruby during his trial. She told friends she was on the verge of breaking the case wide open. On November 8, 1965, almost exactly 2 years after the Kennedy assassination, Kilgallen was found dead in her Manhattan townhouse. She was 52. The official cause of death was a combination of alcohol and barbiturates, but the circumstances were strange. She was found in a room she didn't normally sleep in, sitting upright in bed, fully dressed, with a book in her lap that she had already finished reading days earlier. Her notes on the Ruby case, material she had told friends she was close to publishing, were never found. They vanished from her home and have never surfaced. No formal investigation into the possibility of foul play was conducted. Her death was ruled accidental. But the timing, the missing notes, and the convenient tidiness of the scene have fueled speculation ever since that Kilgallen was silenced because of what she had learned about the Kennedy assassination. She is buried at Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York, the same cemetery where, as it happens, we'll find another name from our tour a little later. From the world of journalism and political intrigue, let's step into the world of silent film era glamour and visit Hollywood Forever Cemetery, one of the most iconic resting places in Los Angeles. Located right on Santa Monica Boulevard, adjacent to the Paramount Pictures studio lot, Hollywood Forever has been the final destination for movie stars since the earliest days of the industry. One of its most famous and most visited residents arrived there in 1926, and the circumstances of his death triggered one of the most spectacular public outpourings of grief the country had ever seen. Rudolph Valentino was the first great male sex symbol of the movies. Born in Italy, he came to America as a young man and struggled for years before landing the role that made him a sensation, Julio in The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse in 1921. He followed it with The Sheik, and overnight he became the most desired man in America. Women fainted at his appearances. His films broke box office records. He was arguably the first modern celebrity in the way we understand the term today. In August of 1926, Valentino collapsed in his New York hotel room. He was rushed to the hospital where doctors diagnosed a perforated gastric ulcer and ruptured appendix. Surgery was performed, but peritonitis set in. He died on August 23rd at the age of 31. Now, Valentino's death from a surgical complication was not itself mysterious in the medical sense. Peritonitis was often fatal in the era before antibiotics. But the mystery lies elsewhere. Valentino had been in apparent good health just days before his collapse, and some contemporaries whispered that he had been poisoned, possibly by a jealous rival, possibly by someone connected to the volatile world of Hollywood studio politics. Valentino's personal life was complicated and heavily scrutinized. He had been accused of bigamy after his second marriage, and there were persistent, unfounded rumors about his sexuality that he found deeply wounding. The poisoning theory was never substantiated, but it was never fully put to rest either, and it became part of the legend. What followed his death was extraordinary. An estimated 100,000 people lined the streets of New York for his funeral procession. Riots broke out outside the funeral home. Reports of women attempting to take their own lives in grief made headlines worldwide. The scale of public mourning was unlike anything the country had seen for a private citizen. His crypt at Hollywood Forever Cemetery has been a destination for fans ever since. For decades, a mysterious woman in black visited the grave on the anniversary of his death, leaving a single red rose, an echo of the Poe toaster tradition, and equally never explained. Valentino's crypt is in the Cathedral Mausoleum, and it remains one of the most visited spots in the cemetery. Just a short walk from Valentino at Hollywood Forever, we come to a name most people don't know, but whose story is one of the most compelling on our entire tour. Sal Mineo was 17 years old when he appeared alongside James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause in 1955, playing Plato, the lonely, vulnerable teenager who idolizes Dean's character. The performance earned Mineo his first Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor, making him one of the youngest nominees in the category's history. He received a second Oscar nomination for Exodus in 1960, and he appeared in Giant: The Longest Day. and dozens of television shows over a career that spanned more than 2 decades. But by the mid-70s, Monroe's career had stalled. The roles had dried up, and he had turned to stage work to keep acting. On the night of February 12, 1976, he was returning to his West Hollywood apartment after a rehearsal for the play P.S. Your Cat is Dead when he was stabbed in the chest in the alley behind his building. A neighbor heard his cries for help and rushed outside, but Monroe died within minutes. He was 37 years old. For more than 2 years, the murder went unsolved. Police initially investigated whether the killing was connected to Monroe's personal life, exploring various theories. Then, in 1978, a young man named Lionel Ray Williams was arrested on unrelated robbery charges. His wife told detectives that Williams had come home the night of the Monroe killing covered in blood and said, "That's the dude I killed," when he saw a news report about the murder. Williams was convicted of second-degree murder in 1979 and sentenced to 51 years in prison, though he was paroled after serving about 12 years. What makes the case unsettling is how random it was. It wasn't connected to Monroe's fame, his personal life, or his career. It was, by all accounts, a robbery gone wrong, a senseless act of violence against a man who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The cruelty of it is that Monroe was at a hopeful moment in his life. The play he was rehearsing was getting good notices, and friends said he was optimistic about a comeback. Monroe was buried at Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York, the same cemetery where Dorothy Kilgallen rests, and not far from his childhood home in the Bronx. From the streets of 1970s West Hollywood, let's travel to the Pacific Northwest, where the greatest guitar player who ever lived rests beneath a granite memorial in a quiet suburban cemetery. Jimi Hendrix died in London on September 18, 1970, at the age of 27. The coroner found that his death was caused by asphyxiation. He had inhaled his own vomit after taking sleeping pills. The amount of barbiturates in his system was significant. His girlfriend, Monica Dannemann, said she had found him unresponsive that morning and called an ambulance, but the details of the timeline have been disputed ever since. Was it an accidental overdose? Dannemann maintained that Hendrix had taken 9 of her prescribed sleeping tablets, far more than the recommended dose. Others have questioned whether Hendrix may have taken his own life, noting that he had been under enormous personal and professional stress. A more controversial theory, advanced by some researchers, suggests that Hendrix's manager, Michael Jeffrey, may have been involved in his death, possibly to collect on a life insurance policy, though this claim has never been proven and is rejected by many Hendrix scholars. Jeffrey himself died in a plane crash in 1973. What is beyond dispute is the music. Hendrix reinvented the electric guitar. His performance of The Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock in 1969 is one of the most iconic moments in rock history. Purple Haze, Hey Joe, All Along the Watchtower, Voodoo Child, the catalog he created in just 4 years of major recording is astonishing. His father, Al Hendrix, brought his body home to Seattle and buried him at Greenwood Memorial Park in Renton, a suburb southeast of the city. The original grave was modest, a simple headstone, but fans overwhelmed the site, and in 2002, after Al Hendrix had regained control of his son's music estate, Jimmy's body was exhumed and reinterred beneath a granite memorial dome supported by 3 pillars. It's an elegant structure, and fans still leave flowers, notes, and lipstick prints on the columns year-round. Staying in the world of early Hollywood intrigue, let's return to Hollywood Forever Cemetery for a story that reads like a murder mystery script, because many people believe that's exactly what it was. Thomas Ince was one of the most powerful men in early Hollywood. As a director and producer, he helped shape the studio system itself, pioneering the use of detailed shooting scripts and efficient production methods. By the early 1920s, he was a mogul, wealthy, influential, and connected to all the major figures of the era. On November 19, 1924, Ince boarded the yacht of newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst for a weekend cruise to celebrate Ince's 42nd birthday. Also aboard were actress Marion Davies, Hearst's mistress, journalist Luella Parsons, Charlie Chaplin, and several other prominent guests. What happened on that yacht has been debated for a century. The official account is that Ince fell ill with a stomach ailment and was taken ashore, where he died of heart failure on November 19th. He was cremated quickly, before a thorough investigation could be conducted. No autopsy was performed. Almost immediately, rumors spread that something far more sinister had occurred. The most persistent theory holds that Hearst, suspecting that Davies was having an affair with Chaplin, picked up a gun and accidentally shot Ince, possibly mistaking him for Chaplin. There are claims, disputed, that Ince had a bullet wound when he was taken off the yacht. Luella Parsons, who had been a relatively minor journalist before the cruise, was given a lifetime contract with Hearst's newspaper empire shortly afterward, which some have interpreted as payment for her silence. Ince was cremated, and his ashes are at Hollywood Forever Cemetery. The story was dramatized in Peter Bogdanovich's 2001 film The Cat's Meow, with Cary Elwes playing Ince. Whether Ince died of natural causes on a boat or was shot by one of the most powerful men in America remains one of old Hollywood's most tantalizing unsolved riddles. While we're at Hollywood Forever, let's visit one more resident, a man whose death was not mysterious in the least, but whose life was so dangerous and dramatic that he earned his place on any tour of famous graves. Actually, let me correct myself. Bugsy Siegel's death was plenty dramatic. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel was a founding figure of organized crime in America, and don't ever call him Bugsy to his face. He hated the nickname, which had been given to him as a young man because of his explosive, unpredictable temper. Along with his childhood friend Meyer Lansky, he helped build the national crime syndicate that organized the American underworld in the 1930s and 40s. He was handsome, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. A rare mobster who moved easily in Hollywood social circles, dating actresses, attending premieres, and rubbing shoulders with studio executives. He had relationships with Jean Harlow and a string of other starlets, and genuinely fancied himself a movie star as much as a gangster. His grand vision was the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, which he saw as the future of legalized gambling in the desert. The project went wildly over budget. The original estimate was roughly $1.5 million, but the final cost ballooned to $6 million, and Siegel's mob associates began to suspect he was skimming money. Whether he was actually stealing or simply a terrible manager of construction costs has been debated ever since. On June 20, 1947, Siegel was sitting in the living room of his girlfriend Virginia Hill's Beverly Hills mansion reading the Los Angeles Times when someone fired a military-issue carbine through the window. He was struck multiple times and killed instantly at the age of 41. No one was ever charged with the murder. The prevailing theory is that the hit was ordered by the mob leadership, likely Lansky himself, after Siegel's Flamingo losses became intolerable. But the identity of the actual triggerman has never been confirmed. Some researchers have pointed to a mob associate named Frankie Carbo, but no proof has ever surfaced. The Flamingo, incidentally, went on to become a spectacular success after Siegel's death. The first of the great Las Vegas casino hotels, the seed from which an entire city grew. Siegel never lived to see it. Within 20 minutes of his murder, associates of Lansky walked into the Flamingo and announced they were taking over. He is buried at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, in the Beth Olam section. The mob's most glamorous figure rests just a stone's throw from the silent film stars and studio moguls whose world he infiltrated so thoroughly. Let's step away from organized crime and into a quieter, sadder kind of mystery. Our next stop takes us to a small cemetery in upstate New York, in the town of Penfield near Rochester. Pete Duell was a rising television star in the early 1970s. Born Peter Elstrom Duell in Rochester, New York, he came from a medical family. His father and brother were both doctors, and studied acting at the American Theater Wing in New York City. After guest appearances on shows like Combat and Love on a Rooftop, he landed the role of Hannibal Hayes, alias Joshua Smith, In the ABC Western series Alias Smith and Jones, a lighthearted adventure show that was essentially Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid repackaged for weekly television. Duell was charming, good-looking, and had a natural ease on camera, and the show was a hit, averaging over 30 million viewers a week during its first season. On the night of December 31st, 1971, New Year's Eve, Duell was found dead in his Hollywood Hills home by his girlfriend, actress Diane Ray. He was 31 years old. He had been shot once with a handgun. Earlier that evening, Duell had watched an episode of his own show, and his girlfriend said he had seemed agitated and unhappy. The death was ruled self-inflicted. But friends and colleagues have questioned that finding for decades. Duell was known to be struggling with depression and heavy drinking, and he had expressed frustration with the direction of his career. He considered himself a serious dramatic actor, deeply concerned about the Vietnam War and environmental issues, and felt constrained by the light adventure format of the show. At the same time, he was politically active and passionate about his craft, and those who knew him well have said the death was completely unexpected. The investigation was cursory by modern standards, and some details of the scene were not fully documented. No suicide note was found. Pete Duell was buried in Penfield Cemetery in upstate New York, near his family home. Alias Smith and Jones continued production with Roger Davis replacing Duell, but the show was canceled at the end of the following season. For fans of early 70s television, Duell's death remains a painful and puzzling loss. A talented young man, a hit show, and a New Year's Eve that ended in silence. From upstate New York, let's head to Nashville, Tennessee, the capital of country music, where a woman known as the First Lady of Country lies in rest at Woodlawn Memorial Park. Tammy Wynette's voice was unmistakable, rich, aching, and utterly convincing. Stand By Your Man, released in 1968, became the best-selling single by a female country artist at that time and remains one of the most recognizable songs in the genre's history. She followed it with hit after hit, Divorce, Till I Can Make It on My Own, Till I Get It Right. Her tumultuous marriage to George Jones, country music's other greatest voice, produced some of the finest duets in recorded music and some of the wildest tabloid stories of the era. Wynette died on April 6, 1998, at the age of 55. Her doctor, Wallace Marsh, listed the cause of death as a blood clot in the lung. But her three eldest daughters contested the finding, filing a wrongful death lawsuit, alleging that Marsh had overprescribed painkillers and that Wynette's fifth husband, George Ritchie, had interfered with her medical care. The lawsuit was eventually settled out of court. In 1999, Wynette's body was exhumed and a second autopsy was performed, which confirmed the blood clot finding but also found high levels of the sedative versed in her system, raising more questions than it answered. Wynette had suffered from chronic health problems for decades, including a painful bile duct condition that required numerous surgeries and left her dependent on painkillers. Whether her death was a medical inevitability, the result of negligent treatment, or something more sinister has never been definitively determined. Her daughters have publicly stated that they believe the full truth was never told. Tammy Wynette is buried at Woodlawn Memorial Park in Nashville, the cemetery of choice for many country music legends. From the world of country music, let's take a dramatic turn to a story of corporate America, nuclear power, and a young woman who became a symbol of whistleblowing long before that word entered the popular vocabulary. Karen Silkwood was a chemical technician at the Kerr-McGee plutonium processing plant near Crescent, Oklahoma. In 1974, she became involved with her union's efforts to investigate health and safety violations at the plant. She gathered evidence of what she believed were serious problems, including allegations that the company was falsifying quality control inspections of plutonium fuel rods. She was contaminated with plutonium herself under circumstances that have never been fully explained. Tests found that her home, her food, and even her refrigerator were contaminated. On the evening of November 13, 1974, Silkwood was driving to meet a reporter from the New York Times and a union official. She was carrying a manila folder and a notebook that she said contained documentation of the plant's violations. Her car was found crashed into a concrete culvert along a lonely stretch of Oklahoma highway. She was dead at the age of 28. The documents she was carrying were never found in the car. The state medical examiner found that Silkwood had fallen asleep at the wheel, possibly due to the sedative methaqualone, traces of which were found in her system. But an independent investigation found evidence that her car had been struck from behind before leaving the road, a dent in the rear bumper that was inconsistent with the crash itself. The implication was that someone had forced her off the road. Kerr McGee denied any involvement. A civil lawsuit brought by Silkwood's estate resulted in a landmark $10.5 million verdict against the company for the plutonium contamination, though the amount was later reduced on appeal and the case was eventually settled. The full circumstances of her death have never been resolved. Karen Silkwood was buried in Danville Memorial Park in Danville, Texas, her hometown. Meryl Streep portrayed her in the 1983 film Silkwood, directed by Mike Nichols. The story remains one of the most chilling examples of what can happen when an ordinary person challenges a powerful institution. After that heavy story, let's shift to something with a touch of dark comedy, though the man at the center of it might not appreciate the description. Our next stop takes us to the Garden of Memories Cemetery in Metairie, Louisiana, near New Orleans. But the most famous part of this story happened in the California desert. Graham Parsons was one of the most influential figures in country rock. As a member of the Byrds and then the founder of the Flying Burrito Brothers, Parsons was a visionary who saw the connection between country music and rock and roll before almost anyone else. And his influence on artists from the Eagles to Emmylou Harris to the Rolling Stones is enormous. Keith Richards has called him a close friend and a major musical influence. Harris, who sang duets with Parsons, has said he taught her everything she knew about country music. Parsons died on September 19, 1973, at the Joshua Tree Inn in the California desert. He was 26 years old. The cause of death was a combination of morphine and alcohol. Whether the overdose was accidental or intentional has never been conclusively determined. But the real strangeness came after his death. Parsons had reportedly told friends that he wanted to be cremated at Joshua Tree, his favorite place. His road manager, Phil Kaufman, decided to honor that wish, despite the fact that Parsons' stepfather had already arranged for the body to be flown to Louisiana for burial. Kaufman and a friend stole the coffin from the airport, drove it out to Joshua Tree, doused it with gasoline, and set it ablaze. They were arrested, but since there was no California law against stealing a corpse, only the coffin itself, they were fined a total of $750. Parsons' partially cremated remains were eventually recovered and buried by his family at the Garden of Memories Cemetery in Metairie, Louisiana. It's a bizarre coda to the life of a man who, in just a handful of years, helped invent an entire genre of American music. From the eccentric world of country rock, let's return to Hollywood's golden age, where we find one of the most luminous and most heartbreaking stories of early cinema. Jean Harlow was the original blonde bombshell. In fact, that phrase was literally coined for her. It was the title of one of her films. In the early 1930s, Harlow was the biggest female star at MGM, a comedic actress of surprising skill and a sex symbol who radiated a warmth and humor that set her apart from the more remote beauties of the era. Dinner at 8, Red Dust, Bombshell, Libeled Lady. She was box office gold, and she was only in her 20s. On June 7, 1937, Harlow died at Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles. She was 26. The official cause of death was renal failure. Her kidneys had shut down. But the path to that renal failure has been the subject of intense debate. Harlow had been visibly ill during the filming of Saratoga, her final picture with Clark Gable. She was bloated, exhausted, and in obvious pain. Yet her mother, Jean Harlow Sr., a devoted follower of Christian Science, reportedly delayed seeking conventional medical treatment, relying instead on prayer. By the time Harlow was taken to the hospital, it was too late. Some medical historians believe Harlow suffered from glomerulonephritis, a kidney disease that may have been triggered by a childhood bout of scarlet fever. Others have pointed to a possible connection to injuries she may have sustained during her brief, violent marriage to MGM producer Paul Byrne, and Byrne's own death in 1932, just 2 months after their wedding, was itself ruled a self-inflicted gunshot wound under circumstances that have been questioned for decades. Harlow's death at 26 was a devastating loss for Hollywood. Her final film, Saratoga, was completed using a stand-in and became a massive hit, driven by the public's grief. She was interred in the Great Mausoleum at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale in a private room purchased by her mother. The cost, $25,000 in 1937 money, was paid by William Powell, Harlow's boyfriend at the time of her death, who never fully recovered from the loss. From 1930s Hollywood, let's jump forward to 2009 and a story that blends martial arts, Hollywood adventure, and a baffling death in a Bangkok hotel room. David Carradine was best known for 2 roles that bookended his career. In the 1970s, he starred as Kwai Chang Caine in the television series Kung Fu, playing a Shaolin monk wandering the American Old West, a role originally developed with Bruce Lee in mind, which adds a layer of irony given that we visited Lee's grave earlier today. Carradine was not a trained martial artist when he took the role, but he threw himself into the part and made it iconic. Kung Fu ran for 3 seasons and became one of the most popular shows of the era. 3 decades later, Quentin Tarantino cast him as the title character in Kill Bill, giving Carradine one of the great late-career comebacks in Hollywood history. He came from acting royalty. His father was the legendary character actor John Carradine, and his brothers Keith and Robert were both successful actors. On June 4, 2009, Carradine was found dead in a closet in his room at the Swiss Hotel Nai Lert Park in Bangkok, Thailand, where he had been shooting a low-budget film called Stretch. He was 72. A rope was tied around his neck and other parts of his body. The initial reports suggested the death may have been the result of autoerotic asphyxiation, a finding that Carradine's family vigorously disputed. His ex-wives later confirmed that Carradine had engaged in self-bondage practices, but they maintained that the scene in Bangkok was staged and that he had been murdered, possibly in connection with his investigation into secret martial arts societies, a claim that has been met with considerable skepticism by investigators. The Thai police ultimately ruled the death either accidental or a result of autoerotic asphyxiation. An independent autopsy commissioned by Carradine's family was inconclusive. The full circumstances have never been definitively established. What is clear is that a man who had captivated audiences for decades, with his lanky frame, his enigmatic screen presence, and his unmistakable voice, ended his life in one of the strangest and saddest episodes in modern Hollywood history. David Carradine was buried at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills. Let's now travel far from Hollywood, back in time to the early 19th century and the American frontier, where one of the most famous explorers in the nation's history met a sudden and violent end that has puzzled historians for more than 200 years. Meriwether Lewis, half of the legendary Lewis and Clark expedition that crossed the continent to the Pacific Ocean and back, died on October 11, 1809, at a rough inn called Grinder's Stand along the Natchez Trace in Tennessee. He was 35 years old and was serving as governor of the Louisiana Territory. He was found with gunshot wounds to the head and chest. The death was ruled self-inflicted at the time, and Thomas Jefferson, who knew Lewis well, accepted this conclusion, noting that Lewis had suffered from bouts of what Jefferson called hypochondria, the 19th century term for severe depression. Lewis had been under enormous financial and political stress and had been drinking heavily in his final months. But many historians have challenged the finding. Lewis was shot twice, once in the head and once in the chest, and survived long enough to ask for water and to say, according to the innkeeper's wife, "I am no coward, but I am so strong, so hard to die." The idea that a man could shoot himself twice with a single-shot flintlock pistol, reloading between shots while grievously wounded, has struck many people as improbable. Some researchers have pointed to political enemies who may have wanted Lewis dead, or to bandits who frequented the Natchez Trace. A petition to exhume his remains for forensic testing was filed and debated in the early 2000s, but was ultimately denied. Lewis is buried at the site where he died, along the Natchez Trace Parkway in Hohenwald, Tennessee. A broken column monument, a classical symbol of a life cut short, marks the grave. It is a national monument administered by the National Park Service, and visitors still come to pay their respects and to wonder what really happened on that autumn night in 1809. From the American wilderness to the cobblestoned elegance of Paris, where one of rock and roll's most mythologized figures rests in one of the most famous cemeteries in the world. Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors, died on July 3, 1971, in the bathtub of his apartment at 17 Rue Beautreillis in the Marais district of Paris. He was 27 years old. His girlfriend, Pamela Corson, said she found him dead in the bath early that morning. A French doctor who examined the body attributed the death to heart failure. No autopsy was performed. Under French law at the time, an autopsy was not required when a doctor certified a natural cause of death. Morrison was buried on July 7th at Père Lachaise Cemetery, the legendary Parisian burial ground that also holds the remains of Chopin, Oscar Wilde, Edith Piaf, and Molière. The speed of the burial, the absence of an autopsy, and the fact that very few people actually saw Morrison's body before the casket was closed have fueled decades of speculation. Some theories hold that Morrison died of a heroin overdose. He was known to experiment with drugs, though heroin was not his substance of choice, and that the body was placed in the bathtub to conceal the circumstances. Others have suggested that Morrison faked his own death entirely, a theory that his own theatrical personality and fascination with death have done nothing to discourage. The most prosaic explanation is that a combination of alcohol, possible drug use, and an underlying heart condition killed him, and that the French authorities simply didn't investigate very thoroughly because he was a foreigner who died in private, and there were no obvious signs of foul play. Morrison's grave at Père Lachaise has become the third most visited grave in the cemetery after Chopin and Oscar Wilde. It has been the site of so much fan activity over the decades, graffiti, parties, alcohol, that guards were posted and barriers erected. A bust that once sat atop the grave was stolen in 1988. The grave is now marked by a flat stone. Returning to the United States and to the present century, our next stop is Forest Lawn, Hollywood Hills, where a young actress who lit up the screen in the 1990s rests after a death that raised more questions than it answered. Brittany Murphy was 32 when she died on December 20, 2009. She had been battling flu-like symptoms for several days and collapsed in her bathroom at the Hollywood Hills home she shared with her husband. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled that she had died of pneumonia, with contributing factors of iron deficiency anemia and multiple drug intoxication from prescription and over-the-counter medications. The findings might have ended the matter, except for what happened next. 5 months later, Murphy's husband, British screenwriter Simon Monjack, died in the same house under strikingly similar circumstances: pneumonia and anemia. He was 40. The parallel deaths in the same house within months of each other seemed beyond coincidence to many observers, and the house itself became the subject of speculation. Some theorized that toxic mold in the aging structure had weakened both occupants' immune systems, though this was never confirmed by health officials. Murphy's father, Angelo Bertolotti, commissioned an independent toxicology analysis that he said revealed elevated levels of heavy metals, including barium and antimony, in samples of her hair. He publicly stated his belief that his daughter had been poisoned. The Los Angeles Police Department reviewed the findings but did not reopen the case, noting that the levels found were not necessarily inconsistent with environmental exposure. Murphy had made her name as the charming Ditzy Ty in Clueless in 1995, a performance so effortlessly funny that it nearly stole the film from its lead. She went on to roles in Girl Interrupted, 8 Mile, Opposite Eminem, Sin City, and the animated film Happy Feet, in which she voiced the lead character. She could do comedy and drama with equal conviction, and directors consistently praised her work ethic and warmth on set. Her sudden death at 32 shocked the entertainment world. The question of what killed both her and her husband in the same house, and whether those two deaths were simply a tragic coincidence, remains for many unanswered. From one young star taken too soon, let's travel to New Jersey, where one of the greatest voices in the history of popular music rests in a cemetery not far from where she grew up. Whitney Houston is buried at Fairview Cemetery in Westfield, New Jersey, beside her father, John Russell Houston Jr., who died in 2003. The cemetery is a quiet, tree-lined place in a suburban town about 20 miles west of Manhattan, a world away from the stadiums and arenas where Houston's voice once filled every corner. On February 11, 2012, Houston was found unresponsive in the bathtub of her suite at the Beverly Hilton Hotel in Los Angeles. She was 48. The coroner determined that she had drowned, with the effects of atherosclerotic heart disease and cocaine use listed as contributing factors. The death was ruled an accident, but the circumstances left many people uneasy. Houston had been seen acting erratically at events in the days before her death. The Beverly Hilton was hosting a pre-Grammy Awards party that evening, and the atmosphere around the hotel was chaotic. How a woman with known heart problems and drugs in her system ended up drowning in a hotel bathtub has never been fully explained in a way that quiets all questions. Houston's musical legacy, however, requires no debate. I Will Always Love You, Greatest Love of All, I Want to Dance with Somebody, How Will I Know? She sold more than 200 million records worldwide and won 6 Grammy Awards. Her voice had a power and precision that made other extraordinary singers seem ordinary by comparison. She was, quite simply, one of the greatest vocalists who ever lived, and her death at 48 was a loss from which popular music has never fully recovered. From the voice of a generation to an artist who defined multiple generations, our next stop is in Chanhassen, Minnesota, a suburb of Minneapolis, where a sprawling compound called Paisley Park serves as both museum and final resting place. Prince Rogers Nelson, known simply as Prince, died on April 21, 2016, at Paisley Park, his home and recording studio. He was 57. The Midwest Medical Examiner ruled that he died of an accidental overdose of fentanyl, a synthetic opioid. But the path to that overdose has raised questions that go beyond the immediate cause. Prince had been dealing with hip pain for years, likely the result of decades of performing in high heels and executing the kind of athletic stage shows that would exhaust a person half his age. He had been taking prescription painkillers, but the fentanyl in his system was not prescribed to him. 6 days before his death, his plane had made an emergency landing in Moline, Illinois, after Prince lost consciousness. He was revived with a dose of the opioid reversal drug naloxone. His associates had been quietly trying to arrange an appointment with an addiction specialist, but Prince died the day the specialist's son arrived at Paisley Park to begin the intake process. No one was ever charged in connection with his death, though a lengthy investigation examined how he had obtained the fentanyl. Some of the pills in his possession were counterfeit. They appeared to be one drug but actually contained fentanyl, raising the question of whether Prince even knew what he was taking. Prince's music needs no introduction to anyone who lived through the 1980s. Purple Rain, When Doves Cry, Kiss, Little Red Corvette, 1,999 Inches. He was a one-man revolution in popular music, a virtuoso on guitar, keyboards, drums, and bass who wrote, produced, and arranged virtually everything he recorded. He won 7 Grammys, an Oscar, and sold over 150 million records. His remains are in a custom-designed urn shaped like Paisley Park itself, displayed in the atrium of the building where he lived and worked. From the musical genius of Minneapolis, let's head to a very different kind of celebrity. A Golden Age Hollywood bombshell whose death in a Pennsylvania cemetery is the final chapter of one of the most lurid stories of the 1960s. Jane Mansfield was a movie star, a Playboy centerfold, and a savvy self-promoter who understood the power of publicity as well as anyone in Hollywood. She starred in The Girl Can't Help It, Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter, and dozens of other films, and she was a genuine box office draw in the late 1950s and early 60s. She was often compared to Marilyn Monroe. Both were blonde, curvaceous, and far more intelligent than their public images suggested. But Mansfield had a sharper, more self-aware sense of humor about her own persona. On June 29, 1967, Mansfield was riding in the front seat of a car traveling from Biloxi, Mississippi, to New Orleans when the car slammed into the back of a tractor trailer that had slowed for a truck spraying mosquito fog. Mansfield, her driver, and her companion were killed instantly. Her 3 children, asleep in the back seat, survived with minor injuries. The crash itself was not mysterious. It was a straightforward highway accident. But the circumstances leading up to it, and certain details of that night, have generated questions. Why was Mansfield being driven at high speed late at night instead of waiting until morning? She had a performance scheduled in New Orleans the next day, but the urgency seemed unusual. More sensationally, rumors persisted for years, largely fueled by her attorney Sam Brody's involvement with a Church of Satan leader, Anton LaVey, that Mansfield's death had been the result of a curse. LaVey had reportedly warned Mansfield about Brody, and Brody was one of the 3 people killed in the crash. The curse angle is almost certainly nonsense, but it has followed Mansfield's story for decades. There's also the persistent myth that Mansfield was decapitated in the accident. She was not. The misconception arose because a wig or hairpiece was found on the road near the car, and early reports were confused. Her death was caused by the crushing impact of the crash. Mansfield was buried in Fairview Cemetery in Penn Argyl, Pennsylvania, in the Poconos, where her family had roots. It's a small, quiet cemetery, far from Hollywood, but fans still visit regularly. From one blonde icon to the king of pop, our next stop takes us back to Forest Lawn, Glendale, where the most famous entertainer of the 20th century rests in the private Holly Terrace section of the Great Mausoleum. Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009, at his rented mansion in Holmby Hills, Los Angeles. He was 50. His personal physician, Dr. Conrad Murray, had administered the powerful anesthetic propofol to help Jackson sleep, a use for which the drug was never intended outside of a hospital setting. Murray was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in 2011 and served 2 years in prison. The conviction established that Murray's reckless medical care caused Jackson's death. But the broader mystery is how one of the most famous and wealthy people on Earth ended up in the care of a doctor willing to administer surgical anesthesia as a sleep aid in a private home, night after night. Jackson had been preparing for a grueling 50-concert residency at London's O2 Arena, the This Is It tour, and associates have said he was under immense pressure and suffering from severe insomnia. The web of enablers, desperate hangers-on, and financial pressures surrounding Jackson in his final years is its own kind of mystery, one that speaks to the dangers of fame at its most extreme. Jackson's contributions to music and entertainment are incalculable. Thriller remains the best-selling album of all time. Billie Jean, Beat It, Bad, Smooth Criminal, Black or White. His catalog of hits spans 3 decades. He won 13 Grammy Awards. He essentially invented the modern music video. And the moonwalk, performed for the first time on a Motown television special in 1983, remains the single most famous dance move of the 20th century. From the spectacle of Michael Jackson, let's step back to a gentler, sadder story. That of a woman with one of the most distinctive voices in 1960s folk rock, whose death in a London apartment generated a rumor so persistent that it has overshadowed nearly everything else about her. Cass Elliot, known to the world as Mama Cass, was the heart and soul of the Mamas and the Papas, the vocal group whose harmonies defined the sound of the California 60s. California Dreamin', Monday Monday, Dedicated to the One I Love. Those records shimmer with a warmth and yearning that has never gone out of fashion, and Elliot's rich, powerful contralto was the anchor of the group's sound. After the Mamas and the Papas broke up, Elliot launched a solo career and proved she could command a stage on her own. In the summer of 1974, she completed a triumphant 2-week engagement at the London Palladium, earning rave reviews and standing ovations. She was elated. On the night of July 29th, after the final performance, she went to sleep in a flat in London's Mayfair neighborhood, a flat that belonged to singer-songwriter Harry Nilsson. She never woke up. She was 32. The coroner determined that Elliot died of heart failure, attributed to a fatty myocardial degeneration. Essentially, her heart gave out, likely related to the strain of years of extreme dieting and weight fluctuation. But somehow, a rumor took hold that she had choked to death on a ham sandwich. This is entirely false. The ham sandwich story appears to have originated from a preliminary off-the-cuff remark by a doctor before the autopsy was completed, and it was picked up by the press and never corrected in the public mind. It has been repeated in countless articles and television shows for 50 years, and it is wrong. The real mystery of Cass Elliott's death is simpler and sadder. Why did a 32-year-old woman's heart simply stop? The strain of chronic dieting, crash weight loss, and yo-yo weight changes can take a devastating toll on the cardiovascular system, and many medical professionals have suggested that this was the underlying cause. But there was no thorough investigation at the time, and the ham sandwich myth has distracted from the genuine medical questions that her death raised. Elliott was originally buried in a crypt at Mount Sinai Memorial Park in Los Angeles, though her remains were later moved. A dark footnote: the same London flat where Elliott died would later be the site of another rock star's death. Keith Moon of The Who died there in 1978. Speaking of musicians whose deaths involved firearms and unanswered questions, let's visit Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills one more time, where the founding guitarist of one of Chicago's most beloved bands rests. Terry Kath was the original lead guitarist and a founding member of the band Chicago, known in its early years as the Chicago Transit Authority. Kath was a fearsome guitar player. Jimi Hendrix himself reportedly once said that Kath was better than he was, a claim that Kath's bandmates and fans have repeated for decades. Whether Hendrix actually said it has been debated, but the sentiment reflects how respected Kath was among musicians. His guitar work on songs like 25 or 6 to 4 inches and Make Me Smile was ferocious, inventive, and way ahead of its time. On January 23, 1978, Kath was at a party at a roadie's home in the Woodland Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. He had been drinking and was handling firearms, which he collected. He picked up a semi-automatic pistol and, according to witnesses, put it to his head, saying something to the effect of, "Don't worry, it's not loaded." He pulled the trigger. The gun was loaded. He was 31 years old. The death was ruled accidental, a case of reckless gun handling. But the precise circumstances have been analyzed and debated by fans for nearly 50 years. Was it truly an accident, or was something else going on? Those who were present have consistently described it as a horrifying accident, and there is no credible evidence of intent. But the abruptness and the senselessness of it, a supremely talented musician, at a party, dead in an instant from a gun he thought was empty, is the kind of event that invites questions simply because the mind resists accepting it at face value. Terry Kath was buried at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills. Chicago continued without him and became one of the best-selling American bands of all time. But the members have never stopped talking about what the band lost that night. Let's leave the United States for the Caribbean now, traveling to the lush hills of 9 Mile, Jamaica, where the most important musician to ever come from that island nation rests in a mausoleum on the land where he was born. Bob Marley died on May 11, 1981, at Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Miami, Florida. He was 36 years old. The cause of death was melanoma, a type of skin cancer that had been discovered under his toenail in 1977. When doctors first found it, they recommended amputation of the toe, which Marley refused, citing his Rastafarian beliefs. The cancer eventually spread to his lungs, stomach, and brain. The medical facts are not in dispute, but the origin of the cancer has fueled persistent rumors. In 1976, Marley was shot in his Kingston home 2 days before a politically charged concert. 7 gunmen stormed the house, wounding Marley, his wife Rita, and his manager. The concert went on, and Marley famously performed with his arm in a sling. Some researchers and conspiracy theorists have alleged that the CIA or Jamaican political operatives later attempted to assassinate Marley more covertly. Specifically, that he was given a pair of boots containing a copper wire or piece of metal that introduced the cancer. This theory has never been substantiated and is dismissed by medical experts, who note that melanoma is a naturally occurring cancer that can appear in any race under the toenail. But in Jamaica, where Marley was and remains a near-religious figure, the theory persists. Marley's body was returned to Jamaica after his death. An estimated funeral procession of more than 100,000 people accompanied his body to 9 Mile, the tiny village in the hills of St. Anne Parish where he was born. He was interred in a marble mausoleum that also contains his guitar. Visitors who make the winding drive up into the hills can tour the mausoleum and the small house where Marley grew up. One Love, No Woman, No Cry, Redemption Song, Get Up, Stand Up, Three Little Birds. Bob Marley's music is the sound of an entire country, an entire movement, an entire way of seeing the world. He was the single greatest ambassador for reggae music and Rastafarian culture, and his influence on global popular music is immeasurable. From the hills of Jamaica back to Hollywood, where we have one more Golden Age mystery to explore. A story that involves a stabbing, a movie star, a gangster, and a teenage daughter. This one doesn't center on the person who's buried, but on the mystery of what really happened in the room. On April 4, 1958, Johnny Stompanato, a small-time gangster and enforcer for Mickey Cohen, was stabbed to death in the Beverly Hills bedroom of actress Lana Turner. Turner's 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl Crane, said she had grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed Stompanato because she heard him threatening her mother's life. A coroner's inquest ruled the killing a justifiable homicide. But the case has been questioned for decades. Turner was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, a glamorous leading lady who had been in The Postman Always Rings Twice, Peyton Place, for which she was Oscar-nominated the same year as The Stabbing, and dozens of other films. Stompanato was an abusive and volatile boyfriend who had beaten Turner repeatedly. The question that has lingered for more than 60 years is whether it was really the daughter who wielded the knife, or whether Turner herself killed Stompanato in self-defense and allowed her daughter to take the fall, knowing that a juvenile would face far less severe consequences. Turner's performance at the inquest was widely noted for being, well, a performance, tearful, dramatic, and precisely calibrated. The legendary crime reporter and author James Ellroy, among others, has speculated that Turner did the killing. Cheryl Crane has maintained her account for her entire life. Johnny Stompanato was buried at Woodlawn Memorial Cemetery in Colma, California, the city of cemeteries just south of San Francisco. The full truth of what happened in that bedroom has never been definitively established. From Colma, let's head back into the heart of Los Angeles, to Hillside Memorial Park in Culver City, a beautiful Jewish cemetery on a hillside just off the San Diego freeway, where we'll find a grave connected to one of the most horrifying accidents in Hollywood history. If you watched television in the 1960s, you knew Vic Morrow's face. He starred as Sergeant Chip Saunders in Combat, the World War II drama that ran on ABC for 5 seasons from 1962 to 1967. The show was one of the most popular series of its era, and Morrow's gritty, intense performance made him a household name. He appeared in dozens of other television shows over the years: Roots, Police Story, The Streets of San Francisco, Hawaii Five-0, as well as films, beginning with the 1955 juvenile delinquent drama Blackboard Jungle, opposite Glenn Ford and Sidney Poitier. By 1982, Morrow's career was enjoying a resurgence. He had been cast in a major role in Twilight Zone the movie, a big-budget anthology film directed by John Landis and Steven Spielberg. Morrow was excited about the project. On the night of July 23, 1982, he was filming a Vietnam War scene in which his character carries 2 Vietnamese children through a river while a helicopter flies overhead and pyrotechnic explosions go off around them. It was 2:30 in the morning. The explosions were enormous, far larger than many on set expected, and one of them struck the low-flying helicopter, causing it to crash directly on top of Morrow and the 2 child actors, 7-year-old Micah Din Lee and 6-year-old Renee Shinyi Chen. All 3 were killed instantly. The aftermath was devastating, and the questions were immediate. Why was a helicopter flying so low with so many live explosions detonating beneath it? Why were two small children on a film set at 2:30 in the morning? The investigation revealed that the children had been hired in violation of California child labor laws. They had been brought on set without proper permits, specifically to avoid the legal restrictions that would have prohibited them from working at that hour and in those conditions. Director John Landis and 4 others were charged with involuntary manslaughter. After a lengthy trial, all 5 were acquitted in 1987, a verdict that remains controversial to this day. There is a strange footnote to the story. Years earlier, while filming the 1974 car chase movie Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry, Morrow had insisted on a $1 million life insurance policy before he would film any scenes involving a helicopter. When asked why, he reportedly told colleagues that he had always had a premonition he would die in a helicopter crash. And according to a production assistant on the Twilight Zone set, just before filming the fatal scene, Morrow remarked, "I must be out of my mind to be doing this. I should have asked for a stunt double." The accident changed Hollywood. The Federal Aviation Administration created new rules about the use of aircraft on film sets. The entertainment industry overhauled its safety protocols. And the debate about when a director's artistic ambition crosses the line into reckless endangerment, that debate has never ended. Morrow was 53 years old. His daughter, the actress Jennifer Jason Leigh, was a young woman just beginning her own career in film. He was buried at Hillside Memorial Park, where fans of combat still visit his grave. We're nearing the end of our tour now, and for our very last stop, let's return to where we spent some time earlier, Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle, for a story that has an almost unbearable symmetry with the story of Bruce Lee that we told earlier, and a haunting echo of the Twilight Zone tragedy we just recounted. Brandon Lee was 28 years old and on the verge of stardom. He had grown up in the shadow of his father's legend, but by the early 1990s, he was carving out his own path as an action star. His performance as Eric Draven in The Crow, a dark, stylish revenge thriller, was being hailed during production as a breakthrough. He was engaged to be married. Everything was coming together. On March 31, 1993, during the filming of a scene at EUE Screen Gem Studios in Wilmington, North Carolina, Brandon Lee was shot in the abdomen by a prop gun. In a grotesque chain of negligence, a bullet tip from a dummy round had become lodged in the barrel of the gun during an earlier scene. When the gun was loaded with blanks for the scene being filmed, the blanks charge propelled the lodged bullet tip with lethal force. Lee was struck and rushed to the hospital, where he died after 6 hours of surgery. The death was ruled an accident, the result of a catastrophic failure in on-set safety procedures. No charges were filed, though the production company paid a settlement to Lee's fiancée. But the sheer improbability of the sequence of events, the specific combination of errors required for a dummy round fragment to remain in a barrel, for no one to check, for the blank to then discharge it with killing force, has led some to wonder whether it was truly accidental. Conspiracy theories, many of them linking Brandon's death to his father's, have circulated ever since, though no credible evidence of deliberate action has ever emerged. Brandon Lee was laid to rest beside his father at Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle. The 2 headstones sit side by side on the hillside, overlooking the lake. Father and son, 32 and 28, both taken in the prime of their lives, both under circumstances that invited more questions than answers. Visitors leave flowers, martial arts belts, notes, and small tokens at both graves year-round, and the sight of those 2 stones together, Bruce's and Brandon's, is one of the most poignant in any cemetery in the world. And with that, our tour comes to a close. We've traveled to cemeteries in California, Alabama, Virginia, Maryland, New York, Tennessee, Texas, Louisiana, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Minnesota, Washington State, England, France, and Jamaica. We visited the graves of actors, singers, presidents, writers, gangsters, activists, and explorers. We've heard stories of gunshots in the night, pills on the nightstand, cars on dark highways, and bodies in the water. Every one of these people left behind a mystery, some large, some small, some likely to be solved one day, and some that will puzzle us forever. Thank you for walking with us. Safe travels home.